mountains may boil! Teamwork is strength! Suffer the wrath! Light of the blazing sun! Keep lolling! Keep papa! Get him! Pyroclastic surge! Incinerate!
Alright, buckle up folks, it's 2025. First of all, Happy New Year. Secondly, Genshin Impact is officially off the rails. Say hello to Mavuika, the Pyro Archon, the Queen of Natlan, and apparently Teva's first motorcycle enthusiast. She's flashy, she's powerful, and she's about to redefine what it means to be a meta character. Today we are diving deep into everything Mavuika has to offer. From a flaming kit to the literal flaming bike, we are covering it all. Her abilities, her team synergies, off-field and main DPS variations of Mavuika, artifacts, rotations, and more. So grab a snack, maybe some fire-resistant gloves, and let's get to it. First up, let us talk about what makes her tick, or in this case, what makes her burn. Mavuika's elemental skill is as versatile as it is overpowered. You've got two versions, one for when you want to use her as an off-field DPS character, and another for when you want to go full on road warrior. Let us start with the simple one, the tab version, her off-field DPS version or support variation. You hit the skill button and boom, a ring of fire appears behind your active character. Every 2 seconds it will spit out pyro damage like a sprinkler system, but you know, a little bit on fire. It is great for triggering elemental reactions, cooking enemies, or just to make sure your characters look amazing. Now it is not going to hit anything too far away, so don't expect it to barbecue enemies on the other side of the map, but for close to mid-range fights, it is really good. It is basically pyro damage on autopilot. But if you want to take it up a notch, and why wouldn't you, just hold the skill button. Mavuika summons her actual flaming motorcycle, hops on, and goes full throttle. Suddenly your normal attacks are pyro infused and you've got a whole new set of moves which make her look like the star of a Natlan action movie. Wheelies? She's got them. Plunging attacks? Hilarious and somehow even more destructive than the normal ones. You can even run enemies over like you're late for a meeting with a Tsaritsa. And it's not just for fighting. This bike turns Mavuika into probably the best exploration character in the game. Water? No problem. Mountains? Just small speed bumps. Air? Yeah, she can fly too. Because physics? Not in Natlan. Now all of this sounds fairly interesting for just being her elemental skill, but her true value lies in her elemental burst. Now sit down, because her elemental burst doesn't just crank it up to 11, it breaks the entire game. Crucible of life and death. The phase where Mavuika stops playing around and becomes a literal force of nature on 2 wheels. She enters this state after using her elemental burst. In this state, everything she does is supercharged. Normal attacks, buffed. Interruption resistance, through the roof. Night Soul energy consumption, no longer exists. For 7 glorious seconds, you are a pyro-dealing, bike-wielding god of fire. And trust me, it feels as ridiculous as it sounds. However, here is the kicker. Mavuika doesn't just use regular energy for her burst. Forget elemental particles or energy recharge, she runs on fighting spirit. So how do you build this mystical fighting spirit? Very simple. You can earn points whenever you or your teammates consume Night Soul energy. Because apparently her bike runs on other people's stamina. And you can also regenerate fighting spirit by smacking enemies with your normal attacks. Sounds good, right? Mavuika, the Archon who actually relies on teamwork. Power of friendship. You will need at least 100 points of fighting spirit to activate her burst, but the real magic happens when you hit 200 points. Why? Because every extra point over 100 will give her burst a boost. Think of it as filling up a flamethrower. Sure, you can fire early, but wouldn't it be more fun to just incinerate everything in one go? The rule of thumb here is, if you can wait, max out her fighting spirit. If you can't, well, Mavuika is still going to leave a trail of ash behind her. Now let us talk about Mavuika's passive abilities, also known as the little perks, which make her life and yours a whole lot easier. First up, she reduces your cooldown of your Night Soul transmission by 20%. It is not a game changer, but then again it is 20% for free. After this we have the passive ability which enables her phlogiston mechanic. Translation, it makes her one of the best, if not the best exploration character in Genshin Impact hands down. Forget climbing mountains or swimming across lakes, just drive everywhere. Those two passives are for exploration. but the next two are purely for combat and will round up her entire kit. After triggering a Night Soul Burst, which is basically all the time if you're running her with a Natlan character, she gets a 30% attack buff. That is right, she powers herself up just for existing. Finally, we have, I guess you could say, the Piece de Resistance. Every point of fighting spirit consumed during her elemental burst increases your active character's damage by 0.2%. That in itself doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you use your elemental burst while it is fully charged, we are looking at a 40% damage boost for 20 seconds. And yeah, the buff decays over time, but even then it is still fairly good. Especially because Mavuika's damage is very front loaded, so you have your most effective buff up when you do most of your damage. As such, while Mavuika's out there tearing through your enemies, she's basically saying, "Don't worry fam, I got you." Alright, let's talk Eidolons. And before anyone asks, should I pull for Eidolon 1 before her weapon? Here's a short answer, no. Weapons before Eidolons. Always, at least in my opinion. Because guess what? Your shiny new weapon can go on another character, however Mavuika's Eidolons, purely for her. That said, if you're lucky or rich, let's break down why her Eidolons are definitely worth it. First up, Eidolon 1. This one is solid. It cranks her Night Soul points up to 120, which means more uptime on your elemental skill. And every time Mavuika gains fighting spirit, she gets a 40% attack boost for 8 seconds. Since you're always generating fighting spirit, this buff is effectively up all the time. It is like slapping a turbocharger onto a bike that's already on fire. On top of that, Eidolon 1 makes her elemental burst charge faster. 25% more efficiency to be exact. So yeah, if you're diving into Eidolons, this one is definitely worth it. Eidolon 2 is all about the more fire, less thinking philosophy. Her off-field skill gets a 20% defense shred on enemies, which is fantastic for reactions. Meanwhile, her on-field version just hits harder, because why not, right? Oh, and the initial hit of her elemental burst gets buffed as well. Basically, if you're not setting everything on fire already, now you will for sure. Eidolon 4 is where things get spicy. Remember that 40% damage buff from her burst, which slowly decays over time? Yeah, Eidolon 4 says not anymore. The decay is gone and the buff itself jumps up to 50%. So not only is your damage staying consistent, it's better, because apparently Mavuika decided that flames should burn forever. Finally, we've got Eidolon 6, the, I guess you could say, grand finale. The "oh you wanted to win" consolation. The details are frankly a bit extra, but the short version, she becomes the Pyro Archon. Like you thought she was strong before? Eidolon 6 Mavuika laughs in the face of logic, balance and possibly the rest of your entire Genshin roster. She's a walking apocalypse on wheels. Enjoy, as simple as that. So, her Eidolons are all ridiculously good. Honestly, the only limit is your wallet or your Freemo gems. Personally, I'm going to skip them because I've got my eyes on Citlali, but hey, if you're all in for Mavuika, best of luck. May our gacha gods smile upon you. And that is about it for her entire kit. The boring part is over, now let us move on to something even more boring, artifacts and weapons. Don't worry, I will try to make it fun, so let us get into it. Alright, it is time to talk artifacts, aka the glorified shiny rocks which can turn your characters into gods, or you know, the exact opposite. For Mavuika, her artifact options are pretty straightforward. Whether you want her tearing through your enemies on her bike or casually roasting them from the sidelines, there is a setup for everyone. For on-field DPS Mavuika, there is one artifact set which towers above everything else: Obsidian Codex. It is the holy grail for any Natlan DPS character, and honestly, you will feel like you're committing a crime if you're not using it. The 2-piece bonus gives you a juicy 15% damage boost while you are in your Night Soul Blessing state, which in itself is already fairly nice, but it is our 4-piece bonus where it gets downright filthy. A 40% crit rate boost for 6 seconds after consuming Night Soul points. That is massive. Like, swap your crit rate circlet for a crit damage 1 type of massive. You're welcome. When it comes to stats, Mavuika keeps it simple. Attack, crit rate, crit damage. Our holy trifecta for almost every single DPS character in the game. If you want to look like you know what you're doing, just stick to this simple formula. Attack sense, Pyro Goblet, and either crit rate or crit damage circlet depending on how balanced your crit stats are. That said, there's one little twist. If you are running her in a Vaporize or Melt composition, which let's be honest here, you are most likely going to do, you might want to swap your attack sense for an Elemental Mastery one. Why? Because big numbers are fun. As simple as that. I tried her out on an Elemental Mastery sense earlier in Spiral Abyss as well as our Theater, and I did like at least 1.5 million crits in Theater and 1 million crit in Spiral Abyss, so big numbers, easily big numbers, right? For substats, it is more of the same. Crit rate, crit damage, attack percentage, flat attack, elemental mastery, all of that stuff. And of course, don't bother with energy recharge, because Fighting Spirit doesn't care about your particles. Now, if you're one of those people who doesn't have Obsidian Codex yet, first of all, what are you doing? Go farm it. Seriously, I will wait. But secondly, you have a few alternative options. Crimson Witch of Flames is a solid backup set for Mavuika. The 2-piece bonus will give you a at least 15% damage boost to your Pyro damage, while our 4-piece bonus will boost your Melt and Vaporize damage by another 15% if I'm not mistaken. It is not Codex, but it will get the job done. Just think of it as your Walmart option for Obsidian Codex, or instead of Obsidian Codex. For off-field Mavuika, things get a little bit more open-ended. You are still chasing similar stats, but now you've got a couple of new artifact sets to play with. First up, we have Hero of the Cinder City. This set is amazing for boosting your overall team damage, as long as no one else in your party is using it. The effects don't stack, so make sure you pay attention to that. Another strong option is Golden Trout. It is tailor-made for amping up her off-field elemental skill damage, so if you're looking to maximize her passive roasting abilities, this set has got you covered. In short, Obsidian Codex reigns supreme for her on-field DPS version and can technically also be used for off-field versions. However, you also have Cinder City or Golden Trope as good contenders for a support Mavuika. Obviously, there are a lot of alternative options in the game, like 2-piece combinations and whatnot, but I want to keep this simple. Farm any of the sets I mentioned, preferably Obsidian Codex, and you will be fine. You've got Mavuika, you farmed her artifacts, and now you are asking, what weapon should I give to the Pyro Archon on a motorcycle? Great question, let's take a look at her arsenal, from god tier weapons to why does it even exist. First of all, if you're looking to make Mavuika the Queen of Natlan, 1000 Blazing Suns is her best in slot weapon. It is her signature weapon, doody-da, right? No wonder here. And at R5, this weapon is a straight up cheat code. We are talking 1.8 million damage on her bursts initial hit. Yes, you heard that right, 1.8 million. And even at R1, it still punches harder than a Monday's morning hangover. After this, we have Mailed Flower, which is a, I guess you could say, free-to-play weapon, even at R5, because we got it for one of our earlier, if I'm not mistaken, Mondstadt events. Not entirely sure on that. And I'm not sure if you can get event weapons by now. I know you can get them in Star Rail within the simulated universe, but I don't know about Genshin. So if you don't have it, that's unfortunate, but for everyone who does have it, it is a really, really good weapon for Mavuika if you're playing her in a Meld composition, which you are most likely going to do. The other option you can go for when it comes to Mavuika is obviously a Vaporize composition, but Meld is really, really good. And I'm gonna assume that most guides out there are going to say the same. After this, we have some of our other 5-star options. And obviously with that, we have our classic 5-star dilemma. Do I use what looks cool, or am I going to actually use a weapon that works on her? For Mavuika, both can be true, but some weapons are more situational than others. Wolf's Gravestone is a really good weapon in itself already. However, you are most likely not going to trigger that passive effect. But if you do, it is unbelievably good. As simple as that. After this, we have Redhorn Stone Thrasher, which can also be a really good stat stick. And then Forged is kind of the same, but if you want to maximize its effect, you kind of want to use a shield character in your party, which you're kind of doing if you're doing crystallize reactions. But the passive is also fairly difficult to max out for your burst rotation, right? So take it with a grain of salt here when it comes to the Unforged. Besides those 5-star weapons, we have a few 4-star weapons you can go for. We have Tidal Shadow, obviously, it is craftable, so you can get it up to R5 if you're lucky enough with your weekly boss drops. And we also have Serpent Spine. At R5 it is a really good weapon. It comes from our battle pass obviously, so it is not necessarily entirely free to play, but it's, let's say, closer to free to play than 1,000 Blazing Suns, for example. And in our case here, in our statistics, you can see if you have the passive active, it is a fairly good free to play option. And if it's not active, it still kind of holds up with most of the weapons here. I would say a difference of 100,000 damage or so is not too much, it's okay. But as always, take it with a grain of salt. After this we have weapons like Talking Stick and Rain Slasher. Talking Stick is really good if you're affected with Pyro, and Rain Slasher in this case assumes you're going to vape your opponents instead of melting them. But yeah, it is what it is. So choose any of the weapons you can see here, whatever you have. 1,000 Blazing Suns obviously is going to be her best in slot option. And if you have it, Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword is also really good, because if you max out the passive, then you are the one true savior. So better use that weapon, right? No, just joking, it's don't use it. But Made Flower, generally speaking, is one of the best weapons you can use on her. But if you have the Primo Gems, try to get 1,000 Blazing Suns, because it will be really good. And like I said earlier during our Eidolons section, personally I would always go for the signature weapon here, because you can also use it on other characters, while her first Eidolon, for example, stays on Mavuika exclusively, right? So yeah, that is kind of it when it comes to weapons. Next up we are going to talk about teams, and finally after that we will talk about rotations. Alright folks, let us talk about team compositions for Mavuika, because let's be honest here, like I said earlier, Mavuika likes the power of friendship. As such, she will need backup. Whether you're melting, vaporizing, or just going full Pyro supremacy, or in other words, Pyro mono, is entirely up to you. First of all, we have made compositions, because, well, they are kinda busted. Let's be honest here. In this lineup we've got Mavuika, Gilonin, Bennett and Sitlali. Translation, you're about to absolutely destroy everything there is. Gilonin is effectively responsible for your fighting spirit. She's your fighting spirit factory, your buff machine and your emotional support. If you don't have her, your burst uptime is going to cry itself to sleep. As simple as that. Bennett is, I mean, we kinda all know the meme, right? Circle impact, and the same kinda applies here. He's our holy ground of damage buffs, if you wanna say it like that. Stand in it and win. Move out of it, and some people would say it's a skill issue. We have Sitlali as our last character here, who is our Cryo MVP character. She's here to keep your enemies frozen and help Mavuika trigger our elemental melt reactions. If you don't have her, well, it kinda gets awkward, if I will be honest here. So let us now talk about a few alternative options for those characters if you don't have, let's say, Gilonin or Sitlali. First up we have Kazor and Sucrose. They are great for grouping and buffing, especially Kazor, but you will miss out on Gilonin's fighting spirit generation, which basically makes Mavuika a little bit more, not necessarily tedious to play, but you will lose out on damage, as simple as that. If you don't have Sitlali, you can also go for Shenhe. She's a cryo character first of all, so you can maintain your melt reactions, and she will buff your charged attacks. It is like using a off-brand cereal. Still good, but you know, just not exactly the same. If you don't have Shenhe, if you don't have Sitlali, and if you want to go melt reactions, we also have Rosaria, who does kind of work, especially her elemental burst is really good because it does apply cryo to your opponents over a longer period of time. But we are kind of getting in the times are rough pick type of scenario here. If you don't have any of those, you can also go for characters like Diona, but once again, times are rough or tough type of scenario here. We also have characters like Yelan and Jinsho. Those will be good kinda for vaporized reactions, which we are going to talk about in a moment. But let's be honest here, and I get it, they are fan favorites. You kinda don't want to use them on Mavuika, because Yelan, for example, her elemental burst will do additional damage if you use normal attacks, which you don't want to do on Mavuika. Like I said, we will talk about that in rotations. They are functional, but why limit yourself? Next up we have our Vaporize compositions, and for that all we need to do is to swap Sitlali out for Farina, and boom, you are now throwing Hydro into the mix. You will lose your melt reactions, obviously, but you gain Vaporize reactions. And in most cases it is going to be a reverse Vaporize, so it's not as strong as a straightforward Vaporize, but Furina herself does add damage to it as well, due to her elemental skill, so it is still a fairly decent team. If you don't have Furina, like I said, you can use Yelan or Jincho, but if you can, use Furina, and according to statistics you can sometimes see on Twitter, most people actually own Furina for one reason or the other. I guess she is a fan favorite in the community, so if you have her, she's really good for Vaporize compositions. Lastly, as mentioned before, we have our Mono Pyro teams, and this is kinda the same old gist here. We are using Furina as our main DPS, and we are going to use Bennett jungling and either Kazuha or Sucrose as our support characters. Nothing new here. Obviously no reactions, no problem. Just make sure that if you use this team, don't equip Elemental Mastery on Mavuika, especially on her Goblet. No, not Goblet, on her Sands, because you're not doing elemental reactions. So just equip your attack Sands and you're good to go. Let us talk off-field Mavuika, because sometimes our queen needs to take a step back from the spotlight because, you know, everybody does enjoy some privacy. If you are looking for a vaporized team, Mualani should immediately come to mind. Mavuika will be really good when it comes to this team because she does have a lot of pyro application, allowing Mualani to do a lot of vaporizes herself. Obviously, Mualani is a character who relies on vaporized reactions, and because of that, Mavuika herself is already fairly good. In addition to that, we are going to use Kazuha and Gilonen, which effectively, due to Mualani and Gilonen being in the team, means we are also going to use Mavuika's Elemental Burst fairly often, which first of all does have damage amplification in its kit, and it is going to do a lot of damage itself. If you use Mavuika here, then you are most likely going to use Golden Traub, because Gilonen will most likely be busy using Cinder City. However, if she's not doing that, you can also equip Cinder City on Mavuika. Generally speaking, Mavuika on Cinder City is a really good character. However, like I said earlier, do keep in mind, it only works once. You can use, let's say, Cinder City Mavuika in a Shaska or Kinich team, and our good old Gilonen uses some other set, and you're set and good to go. Personally, I really like, for example, a Shaska team where I use Mavuika as a support character, because once again her Elemental Burst does a lot of damage, and it is also going to help you out due to its damage amplification. Not to mention her elemental skill itself being fairly decent when it comes to pyro application and damage in itself. This is also one of the reasons why I would say, instead of running Cinder City on Mavuika, use it on one of your other Natlan support characters and just go for Golden Traub, because Golden Traub will buff your elemental skill damage by 50% if Mavuika is not on the field, which is going to be most of the time. And if none of that tickles your fancy, just toss her into literal any composition which needs pyro reactions. Vaporize, melt, overload, burning, doesn't really matter, Mavuika got you covered. Her versatility is what makes her such a strong off-field option. Another team you can technically even go for is, for example, a Navia team, because Mavuika will help you out a lot when it comes to generating crystallized reactions. Once again, due to the damage she is going to provide, as well as her damage amplification, Mavuika is a really good support character. And of course, let's be honest here, she's not going to outshine Mavuika on a bike as your main DPS, but if you want to use her as a support character, then definitely keep her in mind compared to other characters like Zhang Ling. Now let us talk about our last aspect here, which is going to be rotations. Like I said earlier, Mavuika heavily relies on you doing your rotation correctly in order to crank out those 1.x million elemental bursts. So let us talk about that. There are a few details you need to keep in mind when it comes to an optimal rotation, but once you get the idea, it is fairly simple. When it comes to our rotations, it is important to keep in mind that our rotation doesn't actually begin with the rotation in itself. Like I said earlier, her elemental burst can be buffed into Nirvana, and because of that we need to do some preparations in order to do an optimal rotation. We are doing a meld composition here, and we are going to use her best in sword team, as simple as that. However, if you don't have, let's say, Citlali, you can also switch her out for Shenhe, and the rotation is not going to change a whole lot. The way all of this works is that first of all we are using Bennett, and Bennett obviously his elemental burst is based on his base attack. So all you need is a weapon that has a very high base attack, as simple as that. On top of that we are using our Noblesse set, and honestly it doesn't matter how your stats are going to look like. All you need on him is energy recharge, so that you can use his elemental burst fairly often, right? So we are looking at 230% here, but that's all you need. After this we have Eidolons. She is using her signature weapon, which is going to be fairly decent here, and because of that you also need a lot of defense rating. In my case it is maxed out, right? She has enough defense rating to max out her entire buffing capabilities. And when it comes to artifacts we are using Cinder City. Cinder City is fairly important, and you need to do your rotation in a certain way in order to max out our buff here. And finally we have Citlali here, who is currently on a tenacity set. If you want to min-max, if you want to hyper min-max, you technically want to use Archaic Petra, but I kinda don't have it, right? I need to farm it, so I can't use it. But we are going to use Tenacity of the Millelith here, which can be a fairly decent set as well. When it comes to weapons, we have Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, which obviously means that Citlali will be at the very end of our rotation before we go into Mavuika and use her elemental burst. Now, before I do a complete showcase, I will explain the rotation in itself, right? So I will slow down the video from time to time, and you can see what I'm doing. First of all, we're gonna start on Mavuika. We're gonna use her elemental skill. You can use a tap version, it doesn't matter, right? Tap or hold doesn't really matter. Tap is probably the better one. So just use your elemental skill and then switch to Bennett. Use your elemental skill again. After that, use your elemental burst. This will allow you to get the particles from your elemental skill while you are doing your elemental burst. So you will have your burst back for your second rotation later on more quickly. And after that, we go to Eidolons. Due to the fact that we have the Pyro element on our enemy right now, we are going to effectively get our max Cinder City buff here once we use her elemental skill. Once you did her elemental skill, you can then use your elemental burst, and after that we switch to Citlali. This is the last character we use before our elemental burst hit. What she's going to do is to first of all use her elemental skill, and after that her elemental burst. As you can see, it is always skill into burst, next character, skill into burst, and so on. It is, in my opinion, more about how you gear your characters than about how you play your characters. Because, I mean, let's be honest here, skill burst is not really that difficult, right? This is post-edit Vakosi, and I quickly want to highlight one aspect here which might be responsible for those scenarios where your elemental burst does not melt. This is most likely due to Mavuika's elemental skill hitting your opponents before her burst does. This will clear your cryo effect, and as such it is impossible for her burst to melt. One way of fixing this problem is to just not use her elemental skill altogether. Personally, I'm not a fan of this approach because some of our weapons want us to use our skill. However, there is another solution you can go for. Simply add 2 normal attacks in between Citlali's elemental skill and burst. This will push the favor more towards your side when it comes to hitting your burst melt. Still, there's no 100% solution for this problem. If you're delayed in your rotation because opponents like to annoy you, for example, then it kinda is what it is. Now back to the video. All you need to pay attention to here on Citlali is that once you switch off her, you need to go to Mavuika, because otherwise your attack buff will go to another character. As simple as that, right? You want that 48% attack buff on Mavuika. And once you're on Mavuika, elemental burst, and bam, you have your 1 million hit. And after that, once you're done with her elemental burst, with her initial hit, you can do your charge attacks until it runs out. And after that, you just keep repeating the same principle over and over again. Once again, right? Elemental skill, elemental burst, elemental skill, elemental burst on all of your characters, and you're good to go. Just make sure that at the very beginning of your rotation, you actually use Mavuika's elemental skill once before you go into your support setup. As simple as that. And yeah, that is our rotation. I will now end this video with a few showcases of her just one-shotting bosses and stuff like that. And If you liked the video, then leave a like, leave a comment, leave a sub, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Let the mountains rain, Lord!